Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Rouge Youssef. I'm going to be the moderator for today. We're just really excited to have this webinar today with legal operators. And as the topic is legal tech in 2025, trends, tools, and evolving role of AI with the legal industry. We have an incredible session ahead of us. We have two speakers today, and which I'm going to introduce. Good morning, Bryan. Bryan is the CEO and co-founder of Ruli AI. He has a very interesting background as a computer engineer combined with his experience in big law and in-house roles in big tech. His passion for innovation led him to co-found Ruli. We also have Claire Hart, Chief Legal Officer at Groq Inc. Hi, Claire. Good morning.
Hello.
Claire is a highly accomplished legal executive and a trusted strategic advisor to some of the most innovative tech companies in the industry. Before Groq, she served as the CLO at Blizzard Entertainment and GC and head of people and business affairs at Guinness. She spent over a decade at Google Legal, navigating complex legal challenges in tech space, and she has a wealth of experience that she will be sharing with us today. We're gonna close it with Q&A and closing remarks. Everyone, please feel free to drop in your questions or comments in the chat. We'll look at them. Also, if you'd like to share your LinkedIn, and people are more welcome to add each other and connect with each other. So looking back on AI in the legal space in 2024, there have been some regulatory developments in AI and challenges as well in terms of creativity, reasoning, and judgment task are harder to assess. I have a graph here to share with everyone, a little bit visual to show the funding that went into AI startups. I've been talking now for a little bit. Let me stop my screen and open the floor to Bryan and Claire. Thank you for joining us again. I am excited to have you with us here. Hold on. I stop sharing my screen?
I can just jump in and start the conversation off on, I think, some of the things that we've observed in 2024, and then we can shift to 2025 too from there and get Claire's point of view. I think you highlight a couple of those regulatory developments that was interesting. I think there's a lot happening in AI that actually, before we prepped these slides, I didn't know about the Elvis Act that was put in to counter audio deepfakes. I think that's an interesting area of legislation that probably will be more top of mind, especially like with the video deepfakes that I keep seeing. I think there's that enforcement piece, which will be the bigger challenge. I don't know on the technology side and with law enforcement, how you actually find out a really good way of enforcing that. And maybe today, the IP laws as they are not an IP expert in particular, but maybe the IP laws, they are actually set up to account for the deepfake problems, but maybe it's an enforcement problem and actually operationalizing it. That might be the challenge. And then I think there's also been the California proposed safety testing laws on with the large model companies. I think that was vetoed by Gavin after some discussions around it to be put through. I think there's pros and cons to an approach of being tactical regulation, but I think some guidance or regulation here is necessary, but I'd probably caution on being too prescriptive on the tactical basis, since the technology is new and you want to see where the natural product development paths can and what the feedback is from market and users to build the best AI that's possible for society, I think is my view. But maybe pass it over to Claire and see if there's her thoughts about 2024 and what she's been seeing.
Yeah, I think about legal issues in AI all the time, both as someone in legal and working at a company that is obviously working in AI. And so I think a lot of the focus has really, to your point, been around training and the dangers of training, data, and who's doing what. And obviously, I know we're talking about 2024, but this week, I think everyone's thinking about DeepSeek. We are at Groq. We launched DeepSeek, actually. So that's been an exciting week for us. But just a lot of concern about the influences on these models and then the influences the models have on us, I think continues to be a thing. I think to your point in terms of regulation, like the technology is always going to be ahead of the regulation. That's how it goes in tech all the time, regardless of what it is. And those of us working in AI or utilizing AI have to predict where the regulation is going to fall out and hope that we're on the right side of it when everything shakes out. So that's the space that I tend to live in, is one in which we're making sort of day-to-day decisions before clarity is provided.
And This is a very interesting point when it comes to regulation, but I'd like to shift gears and ask you about AI adoption in the legal space. This is a question for both of you, Bryan and Claire. Like, how have you seen AI adoption evolve in the legal industry over the past year? And what's been the most surprising development in 2024?
Yeah, I think on that first part, I think we're in the middle of this conversion of interest where it's gone from interest, I'm kicking the tires, to I'm actively identifying and making the dot connection on their problems that I'm trying to solve. And then I think if you have the right AI partner with you, then they will adopt their solution to help solve that problem, right? I think we're still early days where with the right partner, you can find someone to help tailor and solve the problem together. And I think that conversation from I'd say last spring to this spring, I've seen that shift from just general curiosity to now we're starting in 2025. We have identified plans of how we can tactically bring in AI to solve discrete problems. And I think that's probably the way to think about it. I think some misconceptions that I heard a lot last year were like when there's conflation with what consumer product level AI is doing versus what like tailored enterprise vertical solutions are possible to do. And I think one of those areas is around hallucination. The general concept of, I think like where we are today with technology is we're not at a point where you have a magic box and you can just ask it a very short snippet and it just does like a magic genie box where it just does, grants your wish and does all the things that's required behind it to do that. I think people using consumer AI chats like that and then finding limitations there, which will be natural, is causing to some of the hallucination, other problems, and then applying that to why I can't use AI in the enterprise application. But then I think in the enterprise application side, depending on how it's constructed, if you're getting far more vertical, you're actually mixing traditional software techniques and applying AI in discrete ways that actually really transforms the limitations of what you had with traditional workflows or traditional tools in enterprise where it was stuck in certain areas or just wasn't smart enough to think about all different situations. So you always had to construct all the possible outcomes of maybe a workflow to adapt it. But now you can plug in AI models in certain enterprise spaces, and it really transforms that experience while minimizing hallucination. So I think that's the evolution of where we're seeing people on legal operations side, GC side, and also law firms start to make that connection and separate out what I would call kind of consumer product misnomers to maybe enterprise applications and how to use them. Is my view. But yeah, Claire, I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Yeah,
what you're seeing.
I think there's three big buckets of concern that I hear a lot. The first is your point, hallucination, and I just point people to first-year associates, no offense, but we're comparing machine to machine is, I think, not the right approach. I think it's comparing machine to human. We make mistakes too. We just need to understand where the mistakes are and try not to repeat them. The second is, I think, around the robots replacing us, which goes to the first point. There's a lot of concern that jobs are going to go away. I actually think jobs just get more interesting because the tools allow us to do things more easily and get rid of a lot of the redundant work. And I think that's where we should all be celebrating the fact that our jobs might get more interesting as a whole. And I think the third is around the sort of IP data privacy sort of concerns where the rules are unwritten and people are very concerned about ownership of their important things and who's going to see it, particularly with respect to confidentiality and privilege and other things. And I think that we're still sorting out. And so different tools offer different solutions, and you have to do that on a case-by-case basis.
And the hallucination piece is always interesting to me because I always tell people, if it doesn't hallucinate, I'm scared. I'd like some level of error with this machine learning and AI tools. If there's no error at all, this is when I'll be like, oh, it's coming from my job. As long as there's
robots
error,
come for our jobs. Yeah. So we're good until then.
No, and I love that Claire raised a really good point about benchmarking, because it's something that's frustrated me a little bit too on how sometimes other vendors describe what the benchmarking is, like a very simplistic term of we are 93 or 97% accurate. And I think that's always confused me because there is no standard on benchmarking of what is accurate. And then going back to the human model, I've made mistakes in my attorney life. I've then moved to the business and product side of things. When things get busy, other attorneys make mistakes too. I catch them. But then also beyond the mistakes, I think that if you asked everyone, you ask 3 lawyers in a room to give their advice on this particular topic, you probably will get 5 different perspectives. And I think, so what's accurate, what is right on the human perspective is this gradient. And so I'm always skeptical when other vendors say we're 93, 97% accurate, because I'm like, I don't know what you're benchmarking against or even how you're testing that for what is right and wrong. But I would say generally, a good AI solution built in the right way probably gets you 90 to 95%, I would say the expected result. And then something causes usually a contextual problem. A lack of data information is typically what happens on that other 5% where you're getting something unexpected, is maybe the way to frame it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And 95% is not bad at the end of the day, because if you're starting from 95%, you're gonna build on it. It's easy to achieve the 100% accuracy once you have the human, the person behind working with this data, or like the response they got from the AI they're using. Claire, I'm curious to hear your perspective from Chief Legal Officer. What are the key challenges legal teams face when adopting new AI tools internally?
The first one is not specific to AI tools, but I think cost is, I think that maybe that was a theme of 2024, really keeping control of cost, showing why you need a tool, what cost savings, in fact, it might bring. And so that's always the first on my mind. I think AI tools help cut through that some. I think that we're seeing that legal tech is accessible at different price points. I mentioned it before, but like data privacy, security, like those kinds of concerns for all tools. So legal tools are not exempted from that, but there's nothing special there. There's always an adoption challenge, both within and outside of your team. The legal team is easier. If you're the chief legal officer, you can help influence that. It's a little harder with your colleagues and customers to the extent you're using it externally, and finding tools that make things better for people to work with you and your team is, I think, a key to looking at tools. And then I think really forecasting ahead, and maybe that's not every legal department's problem, but I tend to work in companies that are evolving quickly, and particularly in high growth, which is where I'm at now. Making sure that we have tools that will evolve and grow with us is really important, because you don't want to be switching tools all the time because you find that you've grown into something else.
Claire, I was curious on that because I think there's a couple vectors that we're also seeing too in our conversation with partners, but I'm curious how you think about that between, you mentioned cost and ROI. If you're thinking about more of a systems design that has tools and also people as part of your team, how do you think of that between people you bring on versus, let's call it like AI vertical legal tools, like a very specific legal tool? As we're seeing, the enterprise IT team will say, I have a general tool for the entire company. Like maybe it's obviously, maybe
Jira?
it's ChatGPT Enterprise or Jira, which lawyers love, I'm sure, which you've talked to and have no choice around Jira or ServiceNow or those things. But yeah, curious, how do you prioritize or navigate those dimensions? And you're doing that process right now, it sounds like, at Groq.
Yeah, I've been in my role for 6 months. So, right, the first thing I did was like show me our spend. There wasn't a budget, so it was show me our spend. What are the tools? How much are we spending on outside counsel? What's my staffing cost? And I try to look at the different buckets against tools, fixed resources, which are your people, and your sort of temporary resources that you can bring in, and your outside counsel. And then you got to balance those. So anywhere you can find a tool that's going to bring down any of those other buckets or replace them is, I think, a chief legal officer's favorite thing to take to finance, to say, look, I'm going to adopt this tool, and I think it's going to take our outside counsel bill with this vendor down 10%, and it's going to cost us a tenth of that. That's a pretty easy sell, but you really have to understand where your money is going, and like how you think the tool is going to impact the work that your team is doing, so that you can justify why a tool is a cost savings. Then it's very easy. But I think you really have to understand how you're going to be able to implement it and what that's going to do to your team's sort of efficiency.
Awesome. And we'd like to hear from everyone here as well. So maybe we can push our first poll about everyone's experience. If everyone just take a second to answer this question quickly. What's the biggest challenge your team faces when adopting AI tools?
We got the poll results.
Oh, let me see it.
It looks like data security is 7%, training adoptions 27%. The lowest, actually surprising, is the lack of trust of AI generate output. So maybe the shift in 2025 is hallucination, like people are coming to grasp with what the scope of hallucination is or an impact. Because I think that was always like the top one that I saw last year. So it's interesting that we see that as a flip. And I think when data security compliance concerns are higher in trading user adoption, it seems like we're moving into the how can we bring this in stage potentially as well.
So Bryan, if you can share with
Yeah.
us your vision for AI transformation that's happening in front of us.
Yeah, let me start with like just trends in 2025 that I'm seeing, and then I can share a little bit about, I guess, like our inception at really what we've been trying to create at a high level. Some of the trends that we've seen that are emerging in 2025 is you have a lot of enterprise IT teams building kind of their own versions of ChatGPT or using OpenAI to effectively give you a better Google search within your data, right? Or Microsoft Copilot deploying that as well. So I think you're going to see these generalist tools pushed by IT across the company. At the same time, we see very discrete tools targeted at the billable hour conversation. And I think it's on both sides. I've seen tools try to solve this dynamic, supporting the in-house counsel side to try and bring down or optimize outside counsel spend. I've also seen it on the outside counsel side where it's optimizing their billables to help make sure that they're actually billing for all their work and at the right junction. So you're going to see AI solutions like on both, people arming up with different AI solutions, and the AI is almost having this dialogue. As we're seeing, we're also seeing the emergence of really mainstream of what we're calling AI agents. This is something I think more in the tech world we've been already building towards. I think, it was at Davos, and Mark Benioff has pushed that out with Salesforce as like Salesforce agents. And really the way to think about what an agent is, it's a piece of algorithm and software, but it has a little bit more intuition and maneuverability within that sandbox that's been provided. And so it can function almost similar to, I think you can start emulating workflows that the way a person's doing it and really just plug and play that in. And that's really is our Legal Hub product, which is one of our products that manages that front door of your legal team, where we can automatically answer questions for the business and triage work and do a first pass and route it to lawyers that come in. It emulates usually a mix of paralegals or legal managers that's managing that front door. But we're seeing that now across, I think, compliance with Norm AI, basically creating virtual compliance teams. And so I think this idea of agents coming in to emulate human workflow, which also is easier to integrate potentially in some cases and more natural. And then there'll be this human to machine interface, which is, again, what our Legal Hub does, where a business user could speak to it and not even know that it's a machine answering on the other side of that email. And it can discreetly transform answers in the way a human does as well, as opposed to like older system that's just trying to do more of a search result. And so you get a really applied experience and very human-like experience. That's where the direction is going, is more agents to plug into workflows. But then the other side equation is we'd like to have a little bit more control as well. And so I think that's where like more personal agents, whether it's Copilot, more vertically tailored is my guess of where that's going, because a lot of it's in the UI and how you want to tailor it for a particular practitioner, whether you're a lawyer or a product designer. I think that UI layer is going to matter more and more going forward as well.
Right. Claire, I saw you nodding when Bryan was saying human-like answers on some of the legal questions. I'd like to hear your take on legal agents and your experience with it so far.
When Bryan and I met, it's been like 9 months or something, or maybe more. I don't know.
Right.
I thought one of the hardest things for an in-house legal team is that we are few and they are many. And so finding ways to provide efficient help to your coworkers is always a challenge. And it's particularly, I think, a challenge with some of the lower risk items that you might not want to get to first because they're lower risk. So you either take a risk or you don't, or you annoy your colleagues. And I think AI agents that can handle some of the things that are repeat or they're lower risk is a real unlock for legal teams, and something that I saw really quickly as a value for Ruli or other things like that, where it's not just a sort of a ticketing system where you're controlling your intake, but you're actually finding out efficient ways to manage some of that instead of just leaving it on the floor or making your colleagues wait too long.
that brings us to our next poll. If we can share this with everyone here about AI's role in legal practice. I think, yeah, now I can see it on the screen. I'm going to give Force a second to respond to that.
I'll give you my answer verbally while we wait for people to vote.
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
Yes.
Like the routine task piece to me is the big unlock, right? I love people on my team who are process oriented because I think sometimes really it's just how you do the work that helps, and having tools that help folks who are process oriented, and even better those who aren't, is a big unlock and a real efficiency gain. And I see a lot of chatter around the budget question, and I think you have to just know your data. You have to know where there is spend in every department. And so you have to understand your spend, and you have to be able to explain whether or not your spend makes sense, right? Just the same as you need approval to go launch a huge litigation. And you should be asking your outside counsel for the budget around that at the different stages and your chances of getting to one stage or the other. I think you also need to go to your sales team, talk to them about how much it costs to negotiate certain things and what can you do to improve the process and what's the ROI on that and what's a tool that could help you. So I just think the routine task is the unlock for the legal team that allows you to do more with less, and also prove why you need a certain tool to help you do that.
We got the answers. Looks like we have 82% on automating routine tasks such as document review and contract analysis. So everyone agreed that it's automating routine tasks. And to your point, Bryan, this is answering FAQs and such as how Ruli work with Legal Hub.
Yeah, I think it's going into this agent perspective, right? I think there's one deploying more autonomous agents that you've pre-programmed. That's like our Legal Hub product where it's going off and it's supporting the business and giving you first pass of work, really transforming intakes. But then I think there's other part of Copilot where it's a personal assistant where you're working with it almost like a colleague, and then it's far more adaptive to your work. Something that's interesting that we have conversations on, literally yesterday as we're starting another pilot with another enterprise customer. It was really funny because at the beginning of the conversation, one of the lawyers on the team asked about the usual questions about privacy security, which is really important, right? We have a private instance of our product. We don't do model training, of course, but we can do some optimization at the database layer for each customer, of course, to do some form of like traditional software learning. And literally at the end of the conversation, another lawyer in the team asked, can the product just learn from how I'm adopting it? And then as I'm answering things, and the next time it just makes other suggestions of how I'm doing it. But then it conflicts with basically what the first attorney said at the beginning of the meeting, which is I don't want it to train on any of my information. So I continue to observe that we have this desire to have our cake and eat it too. From a technology perspective, it's not possible to fully achieve that. I think there are ways to achieve it. Some of which is if you are a larger corporation, we can build a custom model, or partners can build a custom model for you. And then you can get that learning, train the custom model, but it's only for you. Obviously, that comes at higher costs. But then if we want the more shared experience, obviously there's the traditional, we can learn some things, anonymize it, which is what the big tech companies have been doing for a long time already, anonymizing data. But people are just not as comfortable with what that looks like when you're anonymizing information, training it. But ultimately, I'm curious to see what the evolution is here, because I think there are folks who want that learning and adaptability of a Copilot that knows me and understands the clauses and like how I respond to legal work. But that comes with it the price of we have to train a little bit, and how we can certainly do that for that one customer. But I think it's meeting halfway in some ways. Love to have follow-up conversations with other folks who have other ideas in that on how we bridge that gap, because I think that's a very interesting area where there's a user product desire there, a problem that we want to solve, but also want to do within these constraints of privilege, privacy, et cetera. So I think that's a worthy problem to try and solve as an industry.
I think there's a counterpoint to that, Bryan, though, which is to say that a bunch of humans on a team doing work on their individual machines and maybe talking once a week in a team meeting leads to a lot of different choices and language and things being made in silos across teams. And one of the things that I really like about Ruli is that it provides a legal team sort of a real-time way to collaborate using AI, where it's learning from the whole, not just from each single individual, right? Not
you have a shared, because you have a shared legal drive, a knowledge base that powers co-pilot experiences and legal hubs. So in a way you can get a shared knowledge experience, and the AI basically aggregates everybody's information, do that sort of first pass analysis.
The consistency of risk and decision making, like a fallback matrix traditionally has done that, for example, in contracts. But I do think this is a place where AI can really help to operationalize sort of risk choices across a legal team that is a counter to that idea that like the work I do is so special and wonderful and I just wanted to keep having me do the same work, but instead think about what is my teammate over there doing that I could learn from, and is there a tool that can help us collaborate more that way? I think personally that's the future, as opposed to each of us having our own little fiefdoms on our individual laptops.
Right. It's like a force multiplier that you're creating, as you coined it, like an AI teammate that serves the entire team, and you have a force multiplier of everyone's knowledge. I think Claire is what you're articulating.
Yeah, and it has this benefit that I think, Bryan, you and I talked about last year, which is that sort of team memory, which lives in the brains of the team members. And then one of them leaves suddenly, and the team memory is gone from that person. Right. And I think that can be a real burden to a legal team. And frankly, and not to suggest that this makes us indispensable, but perhaps it keeps us on our toes to continue to do well in our roles, because we're not just harboring information in our heads or on our laptops, but we're developing sort of a legal team brain together that we can all benefit from as people come and go.
Okay,
let's see. Do you want to jump to some questions, Rouge? And have there been any questions we should answer in the?
Yeah, so we have Hedy here for Claire. She's asking you, Claire, what would happen if someone in legal finance asks another, does our legal spend make sense? How does someone outside of legal know?
Yeah, I think this is where you really need to be able to translate your spend into value. And I think, like I said, sometimes that's really easy or really hard in the context of things like how many patents have we filed and here's your ROI on that, or did we win this trial or not, and litigation, and then what's the ROI on that. But there's ways to use data, and tools can help us get data that show that we're, for example, turning around contracts faster because we have a tool that's helping us. I think that was the evolution, the very, very early stages of legal tech, where let's make contracting faster, and then you can demonstrate that. You just have to be understanding of what's happening and the data around it, and then make that case. Of course, I, like everyone else, hates being second guessed by finance. And that happens at least annually if you're budgeting. And so I usually come in with my show of how I am doing more with less and the ways that I'm planning to do that in the next year. And I find that is always a winning conversation with finance. And it sometimes allows you to keep your budget and do more, which is even better.
A question for Claire. What advice would you give legal professionals who are hesitant about emerging AI tools? The ones who are still on the fence of AI tools, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I've had some more raw conversations. Interesting, but some tidbits. So I'm hoping I can still retire before I have to learn AI or have to deal with it. This is the latest one I've gotten.
I hear that too. And I'm obviously like an AI optimist. I work full time at an AI company. I work with Bryan and Rouge to help support Ruli. I believe that AI is the future. I think it is here. There is no avoiding it. Like, we have to live with it. I know lawyers are very risk averse, or people who work in the legal profession tend to be risk averse. That's why they're drawn to this work. I call myself the chief worrier at my company, but I think there is no avoiding it. So the question is, how are you going to use it? How are you going to have it enhance your work and your life? How are you going to leverage it to do more with less? How are you going to understand from others how they're using it and then apply that? And I think if you just take a little small step, right? Take something that's really easy and not confidential and privileged, and throw it in your favorite chat bot, whether it's Ruli or ChatGPT or Groq.com, where you can try DeepSeek, and just see what you get and see if it's better. I did this yesterday, just so you guys know. I used our tool because it's ours and I know how the data privacy works. But I put in some notes from a meeting at the same time that someone on my team was drafting the notes. And it wasn't great, to be honest with you. The person who sat in the meeting with me and took the notes did a much better job of summarizing it. But it did okay. It got us like 50% of the way there. And that was without trying to, that was just a single prompt, not trying to make the prompts better or ask additional questions. And I just did it because I was really interested to see how DeepSeek is working, to be honest, because it's been all the buzz this week and I wanted to see how good it was. It was okay. It got me started if she wasn't already working in parallel. And she was happy to see that she's still very valuable.
I would think another thing I learned yesterday was the GC of that team that's onboarding with us on a pilot. One of their primary motivators was the rest of the company is deploying all these AI tools in engineering, marketing, sales, et cetera, that he needs to come up with a policy, like a data privacy policy, an AI policy of how the company should use this. And then I need to figure out how I would use it. And that's actually, the pilot's going to actually help him figure out what the data privacy policy will be for the whole company, because he now needs to get ahead of it. And he thought the best way of doing that was actually to go through the process himself of evaluating a tool and seeing what the policy should be. So that was also an interesting unlock for me to learn about his thought process as well.
What key factors you look for when evaluating AI tools?
Yeah, I think we've already touched on a lot of them, and there are probably a couple in the poll that I would say, right? I think the one thing that we haven't talked too much about is how do you get it set up and started? And many of us probably have used legal tools that required a ton of implementation. You have to have the money and the people time to do that. And so to me, that's like a huge one that we haven't really talked about. Something that works pretty well out of the box and you can just continue to evolve your use of it over time is really helpful. Nobody has time for a 6-month integration. At least
Absolutely.
I don't.
And Bryan, I think this is something you deal with a lot when it comes to implementation, like onboarding new clients. How have you really solved this implementation problem?
Yeah, I think implementation in the past has been somewhat challenging because AI is not, like AI wasn't present and you had to basically do a lot of business logic programming in, and then configuring the tools. And it's like the 6-month process with a lot of vendors. Now, because you can do things in a more human intuitive way, our onboarding set up where if you want to deploy your knowledge base, you literally drag and drop files in or do a Google Drive sync or SharePoint sync, similar to how you onboard somebody on the team. So it's very akin to that process. And when you share the documents with our platform, then that already unlocks the experiences. So it's very different than in the past where you had to now translate that into some sort of workflow and work with somebody on the vendor side and program every bit of logic in. Our AI is able to read that, your legal drive, and then we point in the right places depending on what experiences that we're going to unlock. And I do see a question here from Joan about explaining Ruli's capabilities. Definitely, we have a slide on that, and I can give that a few seconds as well. But maybe we should start with the other earlier questions in the chat.
There's one from Michael Kwon that I think he dropped off, and I'll follow up with him. But I think it's interesting. Like, definitely, you should tell them about trials, piloting. The other thing is, I think it's really interesting to think about litigation. So, how are people utilizing the tools for litigation? I know there are specific tools there, but it might be interesting to those 2 points on Ruli.
Absolutely. Thanks, Claire. We'll definitely follow up with Michael afterwards.
Let's move on to Nevin's question. What do you think is the most effective way for legal teams to utilize AI today? Is it contract review, general intake, or something else?
Yeah, Claire, do you have a point of view? And then I can share mine afterwards.
Yeah, I think it depends on your legal team, right? I could tell you mine, but I have a legal team of currently 5 looking for our 6th, if you know any great contract managers. And we're building
their resume.
And we're building out our processes and our tooling as we build the team and scale. We're looking at the landscape. I have a bit of a hot take that I don't know that a CLM. I have in the past adopted a CLM as a first tool. That's not where I'm headed this time, because I think there are more multi-tools that are interesting. The kinds of things that we're thinking about as a company that later stage looking to scale and build definitely is process improvement, quick and easy answers. How do we utilize We're a 7-year overnight success. So how do you utilize 7 years of information without having to dig through an archive? I think it's building, it's consistency across the team. We do a lot of contracts, so certainly there's some stuff there, but we also have a very heavy IP portfolio. We're looking at ways to leverage tooling for understanding and evaluating our patents and our trademarks. So yeah, everywhere.
Right.
Yeah,
What
I
about
think
you,
the other
Ben?
thing I'd add on is it really depends on what your pain points are. And what we've discovered is the pain points are they are shared across. I think some of them definitely contract reviews one, intake is another, but where you start is unique to each customer, and we're happy to have like conversations about that. And be honest, we are not a CLM, but what we found is like we'll invite you all to a spot draft summit later in SF in February that we're partnering with them. They are CLM, but we found that their customers are asking for things like Copilot and Legal Hub or intake product. Because it complements a lot of these other areas which GCs have described as I have this everything else problem that's not a sales CLM. And that might be one place to start. And then there are more discrete tools like getting into very specific IP patent tools and other areas that you can drill into as well, or e-discovery. But I think really discovering what is your largest pain point is maybe the place to start. Love to,
That's a
maybe
good
I can
point.
tackle the question around Joan's question about how to share ROI a little bit and explain Ruli's capabilities. I can at least share my perspective in one slide version. Maybe we can
Yeah, let
do
me
a very
share
light,
this.
do a light overview of Ruli. And then if anyone wants to know, if anyone wants to learn more, please contact us afterwards. We'll reach out to everybody on this call. We also offer 6 to 8 week pilots for folks, complimentary. And we really tailor that experience. If anyone's interested in just giving it a try, we're always open to that.
We
But
have a
really,
testimonial here from Navan in the chat that he's been testing out Ruli this week, and it's a pretty robust AI powered
awesome.
platform. There's a
Thanks,
lot of
Navan.
legal team can do with it, in his opinion. Thanks, Navan.
Awesome.
Okay, back to you.
Yeah. So very high level, as described it, we're really trying to create this full suite platform. Think of it as a teammate built around your knowledge base, your legal drive, and sharing that as a team, as Claire talked about, being a force multiplier. So underpinning all these modules is your knowledge drive, and you can run it without the knowledge drive to start. But things get better when you pair your knowledge to these experiences. You can choose one or more modules. It's meant to be complementary to what pain points you need to solve first. And you can basically mix and match and choose one or more depending on what the needs of your enterprise are. And so starting on the left, we have a Copilot experience, not unlike your ChatGPT sort of for lawyers. We designed the UI to be more intuitive and have shortcuts built in for very discrete legal use cases. You have this ability to also point it and focus to your entire knowledge base, giving you basically a semi-custom model answer without having to train a model. And that's one way we're solving this problem where people want tailored responses. And you put literally your entire legal drive of 100,000 documents and point the AI towards it and get that very custom sort of response without us training an actual model. And that's preserved inside your instance of Ruli. That's something that's unique that we do. We also create this magic prompt feature where we know there's this problem around prompting and talking to AI. And so you start with a very basic prompt, a few words of what you're trying to do. Then you click magic prompt and it basically completes your prompt. It's almost this half-page memo and in a very world-class structure, and it sends that to AI instead. You get basically a night and day answer. And so far people have been really impressed with that solving their pain points. And then moving to data grids, basically think of it as like a spreadsheet analysis report that you can run on literally your entire CLM database of contracts. It's also really great for any unstructured documents where you're trying to get clause extraction out or try to get answers. We recently helped an enterprise where their CLM was not able to pull out licensing terms, due diligence for them. They put in 1,500 licensing deals. It could answer questions like, does this have a change of control clause? If so, what is it? Does it have a assignment clause? What's the legal notice period? Or what the legal notice obligations are? What's the legal notice email address? And it pulls all that stuff out in a really digestible spreadsheet. And again, just really simple AI questions that you ask at a high level, and then we actually do all the lower level AI prompting for you. And so that's a very interesting use case. We've also had some GCs highlighted for use with side letters, potentially things in e-discovery on the litigation use case, for going through a lot of unstructured documents. Like we're experimenting with some financial clients on earnings call transcripts, SEC filings to go a little bit adjacent finance. People also highlighted to use it for employee stock option agreements or compensation letters. Those are very unstructured. You can't process that in a CLM. You can put all that into Data Grid and just figure out all the terms that you're looking for and get questions answered. And then Legal Hub, we've already talked a little bit about. That's how Ruli was initially conceived. And that is your legal agent that you deploy, and it answers questions in Slack, Microsoft Teams, or email automatically for the business. You can have a little back and forth with them to clarify before they answer. And then it gives you a first pass legal issue spotting and routes it to the right lawyers on the team, converts into a matter management system with built-in dashboards, really great for GC resource management. And then in a month from now, we'll have a Word extension where Copilot will be built into the Microsoft Word extension. And you'll be able to basically run playbook rules, get AI red line suggestions, and do issue spotting and do compliance checklists really easily. But we think together this becomes a really compelling suite that could be maybe everything you need for maybe smaller legal teams. As you get to mid-sized legal teams, it's a great complement to a CLM. And yeah, if anyone wants to learn more, again, we're happy to do demos, pilots. Just let us know, and we'll share a little bit more after this call. And then I wanted to touch on the Legal Hub was on the ROI. So for an S&P 500 customer we just onboarded, basically what we're doing is we're answering questions for the business team off of a 200-page legal handbook, and that's doing it automatically. And then we're also doing compliance review and automating 80% of it or so, and only escalating the other 20% to the lawyers. And basically, we categorize their current workflow of the volume that's coming in, how many questions, how many inquiries. We estimate about 25% of those questions were redundant. We could auto answer them. And so it's taking that work off the plate. And then we could auto review the compliance against another piece of policy that they had. And that reduced another 80% of work. So literally the savings was they did not need to hire another maybe senior paralegal for $125,000 a year, and we're a fraction of that cost. And then the dual benefit was the business team was getting the answers immediately and 24/7, whereas before they had to wait at least close to 5 business days or something like that to basically get a turnaround. And so I think that's one way of proving ROI is when you go down to the pain point, showing the before and after in the pilot. And it's really easy to get a green light from there on production after that. But let me pause there and see if there's any other burning questions. Claire, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but just wanted to give people a summary.
No, I love that. I love that use case because I think the handbook was something I originally came to mind for me when I was getting to know Ruli, because I like to give people the example of can I take this $100 bottle of wine for my customer? It's nice to not, those are questions you want to answer and you want people to do the right thing and you're glad that they're asking. But the expense of answering those questions, especially in a large organization, can really be taxing to a legal department. And for those who were non-believers on the budget thing, I think if you can show your finance team you've answered, depending on the size of your company, 100, 200, 1,000 questions just from your handbook, that's really compelling data. And you can easily look at the cost it would be if there was a human doing that and make the case.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Claire. Unfortunately, we are at time, but I want to thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us today. I really like when you said doing more with less. I wrote it down in my notes. Loved it. Thank you, Bryan, for everything. And for anyone who joined us today and would like to learn more about Ruli, please reach out directly to Bryan or myself. Our LinkedIn is in the chat. We're happy to give you a demo, or like Bryan mentioned, we do run pilots for teams who would like that. So
yeah,
thanks
but
again,
thank you everyone for taking the time and coming to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.